All right. So starting seeds indoors at home. This is something you can do, which is it's definitely a labor of love. It does require some special equipment and a little extra labor and planning, but it is a really great way to be a more self-sufficient gardener, and it's a great way to be extending your gardening or starting a bit early, so you get to start thinking about the growing season as early as January or February. It definitely makes it feel like spring is a lot closer. So there's a lot of things to consider when starting your own seeds. And sometimes it's not always the right fit based on whether or not you have capacity to grow them indoors or what exactly you're looking for. And so definitely recommend looking into, in addition to or instead of starting your own seeds, looking into local seedling sales in your area. So any local farm often has a seedling sale. So check those out. I know in the Boston area, in addition to City Natives, which is a native perennial and annual vegetable seedling sale each spring. That's our affiliated greenhouse, and all the proceeds go to the community gardens. There's a variety of local farms like Brookwood Farm, Allendale Farm, the Food Project, are all around the Boston area and are selling seedlings in May. So check that out as a way of supplementing what you grow yourself. But for those of you who are here, I imagine you're interested in starting your own seeds. So we're going to get into that. So the first thing you have to consider is, where are you getting your seeds? So, you can get them at your local hardware store, or at a variety of seed saving catalogs or online catalogs. And as you're choosing seed, you want to think about several factors. So whether or not they are organic or conventional seeds. So that just means that, in the same way as you get organic vegetables, the crops that seeds are grown out of can be grown with organic or conventional methods. Heirloom versus hybrid. So hybrid varieties are often, you'll see F1 hybrid. They're often bred specifically to have traits that make them more adaptable to your environment. So they might be disease resistant to a certain disease. So there's a lot of hybrid tomatoes and cucumbers and squash, which are especially prone to diseases. They might be hybrid for just several traits that are really desirable, like flavor, color, days to ripeness. And so those can be, if you really have a problem with a certain disease, then it's useful to look into hybrids that are resistant to that disease. Heirlooms, on the other hand, are crops that have been passed down for at least 3 human generations. So, many decades. And those are crops that, have cultural and historical significance. So, I think there's been a big movement around seed saving, and a lot of that is, these heirloom crops that have been passed down for generations and carry a lot of stories and culinary importance. A lot of people insist that heirlooms are more flavorful, definitely more interesting. So I think the classic heirloom you must have heard of is heirloom tomatoes, which are often, you can find them in farmers markets or organic grocery stores, and often are much more expensive because they are a little less hardy, and they're a little more challenging to sort of fit into the conventional food system. They're not exactly the same shape or size all the time, but they can be more interesting. And so it's often nice to have a balance of heirlooms and hybrids. One thing to think about if you're saving seed for the next season is that heirlooms are the only things that you can reliably save seed from and expect it to grow back in the same trait. But we have other workshops on seed saving, so you can check those out at a different time. So annual versus perennial, this is also partially around your garden planning process. Perennials are going to come back every year, so they are often harder to start from seed. For instance, something like mint or thyme just takes a lot longer to start from a seed. But once you have it established, it will come back every year, versus annual crops, which you need to replant every year. And then days to maturity, which is usually listed on your seed packets or on the online catalog when you're looking for seed. That's an important thing to look into because you want to make sure you're going to have enough time to grow it. And days to maturity is usually after germination until it becomes at the stage that it's harvestable, specifically for vegetable crops. So, you know, some crops that are more suited for warmer environments are going to not necessarily be able to mature in the time of our shorter growing season here in the Northeast. Definitely, there's a, you know, you should be looking into all of the growing information when you're looking at seed packets, so that you get a sense of what you're going to need to do to, you know, make that plant thrive. One thing that when people buy seeds, a common mistake is to get way too much seed for your growing space, especially if you're a small scale gardener. So, you know, really think about how many seeds are you going to really need to grow the number of crops you want. Maybe you have a few more than the number of plants you want to have to account for seeds that don't make it, but you don't want that much more. So check how many seeds are in each packet and maybe consider splitting them with a neighbor if there's too many seeds. I see a raised hand.
Yes, so there's a question in the chat. Somebody asked, why use organic seeds? Does it make a difference to the vegetables when grown?
That's a great question. It does, you know, I think like choosing whether or not you eat organic or conventional is a very personal choice. I think in terms of, you know, often people go for organic because they are concerned about pesticides on the produce that they're eating. That's less of a factor when you're thinking about seed. Organic seed is just going to, you know, if your reasoning for choosing organic is about how the practices are to the soil, to the, you know, like their impact on the environment, then that might be a reason to choose organic. Organic is generally slightly less damaging to the environment. Though it's not, you know, I think that's, you know, but it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of it's not like there's going to be pesticide on the produce if there was pesticide on the, you know, and there is organic pesticide too, of course. So, you know, it's a personal decision. Often they're a slightly more sustainable option. And then I'm seeing that some people are asking questions as a direct message to me. Since it's hard for me to see the chat, try to make sure that you are sending it out to everyone. It's also nice for other people to see the question. So I'm seeing a question, are there seed swapping or sharing sites? I will say that an upcoming event that might not be on our website yet is we are co-hosting a seed swap at the Food Project, which is in on the Roxbury-Dorchester border at the Dudley Greenhouse in Boston on April 2nd, whatever the first Saturday in April is. And so that'll be a really great opportunity to exchange seeds. And then definitely check out local Facebook groups. There's a lot of really great Facebook groups for gardening in your neighborhood or in your town. And that's a really great place to swap seeds virtually. All right. Johnny's, which is a seed company, has a lot of really great resources for seed starting, and I'm going to mention them several times. So definitely just navigate their website if you want to look for tools around seed starting. So seed companies, here are a couple of seed companies that, you know, people often source from. So Fedco and Johnny's are our main companies. They're cooperatively owned, which is great. And for us in the Boston area, it's nice to sort of choose seed companies that are closest to your growing environment. Like if you're choosing seed, like Southern Seed Exposure is a really great seed company. They often grow Southern varieties, which might not be the same climate as us. However, I know that more and more growers are thinking about growing more and more Southern crops as our climate is changing and becoming more, I mean, I would say that the Boston climate is like more resembling a Philadelphia climate these days than when I was a kid, and so thinking about what have been thriving in Philly area growing environment for years, and how can we emulate that. However, it is always safe to choose a colder climate crop. So those are great. They're really great for sort of larger scale. They have a lot of hybrids. They're suited for larger scale growers, but they can be great for small scale growers as well. One company not on here that I definitely recommend, this slide is a little outdated. I actually don't necessarily recommend. There's some political controversy around Baker Creek heirloom seeds, which you can look into and make your own choices about. But True Love Seeds is a new seed company in the last couple of years based in Philly, and uplifts culturally important crops, and their seeds and their stories, and is also a cooperative, and all of the growers get 50% of the proceeds. And Southern Seed Exposure, which I mentioned before, is also a cooperative in that all of the growers get 50% of the proceeds. So that those are great. Definitely fun to look at a bunch of different ones. I'm going to write in the names. Southern of those two seed companies as well. So lots of different companies to consider. Feel free to put in the chat any seed companies that you love and love sourcing from. There's a lot of different reasons to get from different companies. All right, so starting seeds, definitely you want to be thinking about what kind of soil you're starting in. So you don't want to just scoop out dirt from your backyard and start seeds in it necessarily. Then you run the risk, if you do that, of having insects, diseases, weed seeds from last season that the young plant will have to compete with. And especially if you're growing these inside diseases, you do not want to be introducing diseases into your growing space. So compost-based potting soils are the best. Coast of Maine is a good bag to mix. You can sometimes get Vermont compost in this area, which is slightly harder to get, but ideally some organic compost-based potting soil is what you want to be using. You can make your own basically by sifting compost, sand or vermiculite, and peat moss or coconut coir. Here's also a recipe for soilless potting media. I haven't actually done that, but I do know, if you're thinking about it, they're only spending the first couple of weeks in their life in this media, so it doesn't need to be, something that's going to sustain them forever. So that's the premise of soilless. And the most important thing, the reason you want potting soil versus any compost is you want it to be well aerated and fine, but also to have some level of good water holding capacity. So the vermiculite, which is those little white dots that you sometimes see that you see in potting soil, are good for water holding and aeration. I see raised hand.
Sorry, I just sent you the question too.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Botanical interest.
Is that a seed company? I don't know about them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look into it later. There's so many. It's the fun goes on and on. Ooh. So what containers are you using? You definitely want to be thinking about drainage. So you need a hole in the bottom of your container. If you have a plastic container that doesn't have a hole, you want to poke holes in it. And you want to make sure the container is sterile. Once again, you don't want to promote disease when you're starting seeds. So 10% bleach solution, you can soak your container in it, or you can use a sort of spray bottle and spray it down and then let it sit for a couple of minutes. So plastic tends to be the most commonly used. It's good for water retention, but not too much water, but also drainage and heat. Unfortunately, a lot of those conventional seeding trays or the kind of 6-packs or what you get at the plant sale are not recyclable, but they are reusable, so you can save them. If you go on your local free cycle group, people are often trying to get rid of them. Just make sure that you sterilize them before using them again. You can use food grade plastic containers like yogurt jars or water bottles. Just make sure you poke holes in the bottom. People do use those peat pellets. The only problem is don't like sometimes with the organic, you'll see the sort of like the pods that have an organic outside that they say you can just put directly in the soil. Sometimes that outer shell doesn't break down fast enough, and that can make the pod sort of get root bound and they don't get beyond that little spot. So definitely break that up before you put it in the ground. And some people do use eggshells or egg cartons. Just be wary, they can get moldy because those cardboard containers retain the water a little too well. So when to start seed, it's all a balance of, and I know someone on this thread on this call is a friend who's in Southern California, and that's a very different climate. So I know this is very specific for a short northeastern climate that has a small window of growing time that's consistently warm, and that is typically, so our average, usually everything's based on your average last frost date, which I believe is in late May or mid-May. And so that's the date after which you can plant warm loving crops like tomatoes, peppers, melons. Before that, they run the risk of, succumbing to the cold. Some plants are more cold tolerant, like brassicas, like kale, collards, cabbage, and then certain greens like lettuce or herbs. And they can go out a bit earlier. But then you have to factor in the ground being frozen. So the other thing when, you would think, oh, but I can just start them inside as early as possible and then they'll be nice and big before I bring them outside. Part of it is that there's not enough light in the day until around March or February to properly grow crops. But the other thing is you don't want your crop in a container to get root bound, which means all the roots start to run out of space in the container. And then after you transplant them, the roots won't realize they have more room to grow. And so it'll stunt the plant. So you're finding this balance of starting it early enough that you maximize your growing season, but late enough that you don't have root bound crops. So if you go to Home Depot or other hardware stores, often the seedlings they're selling, that's why I'm usually recommending local farms in May, are very root bound. And so definitely if you're going to a place like Home Depot or Lowe's, definitely pull the little plant out of the tray and check what the roots look like in the little pod, and make sure that there's not a really thick web of roots, because that means they might not do so well after you transplant them. So there's a really great tool. I'm trying to see if they have it here. There's a really great tool for seeding schedule on the Johnny's website. So you can type in wherever you are your average last frost date, which is something you can look up, and then it tells you how many weeks before or after to grow most typical crops. So for instance, tomatoes, which need to be transplanted after the last frost in mid to late May, you want to start 6 to 8 weeks in advance. So you would start seeding those in March. And you can find more information about each crop. Often that information is on the growing tips on seed packets or seed catalogs. They'll say, oh, lettuce, start 2 to 3 weeks before, or actually you can usually grow it before the first, so start 6 weeks before average last frost. And so, it'll give you information about when exactly to plant them. But usually you start seeds indoors about anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks before the plant can be transplanted. 12 is really long. Usually it's somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks. And for squash, they grow really fast. So actually often a lot of cucumbers, melons, summer and winter squash, you actually only want to start 2 to 3 weeks before, because they are going to rebound really fast. So your potting soil, you want it to be well moistened but not soggy. One mistake a lot of people make when starting seeds is to over water them at a given time, and then it drowns the seeds. So you want your soil, in an ideal world, you want your soil to be as moist as a wrung out sponge at all times, which is obviously not possible, but watering it multiple times a day if you have a warm environment with a spray bottle at first is one of the best ways to, best water your early seeds. So well moistened potting soil, sprinkle. So often I'll make a little divot with my finger up to maybe my first knuckle, not the big one that you bend your finger with, but the little one between the middle of your finger and the tip of your finger. So it's about an inch deep. And then put your seeds in each divot and then sprinkle more potting soil on top, or sort of like push the potting soil around it. Seeds typically should be buried twice as deep as they are wide. So very small seeds barely need to be buried, whereas bigger seeds like peas or beans need to be buried a couple of inches, or like 2 inches rather. So, a little divot, like half an inch maybe for some greens that have smaller seeds is appropriate. Just making sure that they're packed down afterwards so they don't sort of move around when you water them. And then the container size that you're growing each plant in really depends on how big the plant is gonna get and how long it needs to be inside before it's transplanted. So, there's usual size that production growers will use. It's better to go bigger than to go smaller, but you don't want to waste soil. So I'm trying to think of different, I usually use Dixie cups. If you think of that kind of size is a pretty like standard size of a container. And there are trays like, or, when you get your 6-pack at the seedling sale, like this bottom right picture, that's about the size of a Dixie cup, maybe a little bit bigger, is a pretty standard size for a lot of like kale or peppers or something like that. But it's on the smaller side. So you want to make sure that you're not seeding them too soon. And if you're worried about them getting root bound in a pot like this, then you can always pot them up, which means moving them to a slightly bigger container. But you don't want to do that too much because the roots are very delicate and you don't want to transfer them too many times. So trying to find the right size container that doesn't waste too much soil is a good idea. So usually, think about one of these pods as an appropriate size to start your average seed in. Tomatoes, you might want to move it into a slightly bigger container, like a yogurt cup, before it actually goes outside. Similarly with, for the most part, tomatoes are the only things that you pot up much more than that. And then for things like lettuce or even like beets or cilantro or stuff like that, you can use smaller containers. Some plants do better than others at being transplanted. Some just have things like tomatoes actually transplant quite well, whereas often you won't, and we'll get to this later, you won't want to transplant root crops like carrots. They're just not going to transplant very well. Beets are one of the few things that actually do pretty well when you transplant them for root crops. So this is specifically, I think this is more relevant for native to the Northeast seeds. The scarification is actually true for a number of seeds, but breaking dormancy is something you usually don't have to do if you're buying seeds from seed companies. They're going to do that for you unless it's otherwise specified on the seed packet. This is if you're saving your own seed. You want to think about anything that you need to do before it'll germinate. So I know that lettuce is something that sometimes needs a little bit of attention before it will germinate. Scarification I don't typically do for any seeds that I grow. But definitely look, if you're saving your own seed or you're growing, native perennials, then it's something you sometimes need to do. But they'll mention that on the seed packet, or if you're saving it, just look into a certain variety and see if there's anything you need to do. Stratification can be done by placing it in a refrigerator for a couple of weeks. Yeah. So yeah, maintaining this even moisture like a wrung out sponge, using a spray bottle to water, trying to not let them dry out. And then for germination, for moisture, you can cover with a plastic bag until they germinate, but then you want to take the covering off so that they don't get moldy. And then for temperature is really important for germination. So a range of 65 to 75 degrees is the optimal temperature for germination, which might be a little warmer than the room temperature. And if that's true, then use a heating mat. Those are like the simplest heating mats are actually quite affordable online, and they just keep it a little warmer. Radiators can work, but they often fluctuate a bit too much, so it's not ideal, and they can get too hot. So I wouldn't recommend that actually. But heating mats are a really nice investment. I actually use my heating mat to ferment things and to let dough rise. Especially in the winter when it's a bit colder in my apartment. So it has multi-uses. Light. Some seeds need light to germinate, some don't. So some lettuce seed, for instance, you actually are instructed to just sprinkle on top of the soil because it needs light to germinate. A heating pad. I don't know what temperature those usually are at. I would look into what temperature it is, and if it's in that range, then I guess so, as long as like things can balance on it. Yeah, air oxygen, well aerated potting media. Oh yeah, this is just showing germination temperatures for things. Actually, yeah, I'm trying to remember. Caring for germinated seedlings. Remove, yeah, so like I said, remove once the seeds have germinated, which means they've sprouted, remove any plastic or glass cover to allow for airflow. You can be a little less like you can probably water it a little bit more heavily once they've germinated and started to get a bit bigger. And then it doesn't need to be quite as warm. But aeration is important at that point. So some people actually set up a fan. I'll show some pictures of setup soon. Once they germinate, this is when you need to start thinking about lighting. And lighting is actually one of the most challenging, or probably the most challenging pieces of growing indoors. Like you need light more than 12 hours a day. And pretty much, unless you have like an indoor greenhouse room in your house, most people don't get that kind of light from a window. And so grow lights are really important. So here's some setups. This is the most tried and true setup on the right, or the top right and left, having a shelf and having these sort of long grow lights. And grow lights are not just normal light bulbs, they're UV light bulbs, which you can get online or at a number of hardware stores. And look how close they are to the plants. And those are on 16 hours a day. And the shelving makes it easy to hang them, which is really nice. And you can also plug in some heat mats underneath. And then some people will go with the added step of plugging in some fans, especially for things that are more disease prone or bulky. And those would create more airflow. So you want a good power strip for sure if you're going to be this expensive, but just imagine like you don't necessarily need to have 5 levels. You can just have 1, and that's going to be a lot of different plants. So it's totally up to you. You can see the setup on the top right also has like a sweet potato being sprouted. It looks like some onions maybe, or maybe those are also potatoes. Time of light and distance from plants. Go back to the slide. Oh yeah, 4 to 6 inches. I can also send these slides out if that's helpful. 4 to 6 inches from the bulbs for 16 hours a day. And the spacing you need to tinker with a bit. It's obviously gonna vary based on the plant. This is a past co-workers setup. So just to highlight, they were using some of these standard plastic containers, but they also have some recycled containers at the bottom. You can see catering trays are great, aluminum, anything sort of food grade aluminum trays, food grade plastic trays. I see some like salad container or something. Just make sure that they have holes in the bottom, and then you have some kind of tray to catch the water, so you don't make too much of a mess. Yeah. And these shelves are pretty easy to get a hold of. They're like, you assemble them yourself. It's pretty easy. You get them at like any sort of standard furniture hardware store. So like I mentioned before, LED bulbs. You just need to make sure that they're UV lights. But if they're LED UV lights, I think that that should be fine. I've actually gotten that question a couple of times and I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, sorry, if someone else knows the answer to that, I don't, but I'm pretty sure as long as they're UV lights, then you should be fine. Potting on. So like I said, like tomatoes are often things you'll pot on. So you'll start in smaller containers and then you can overseed them a bit. And then because their roots are these are pretty hardy crops for transplanting. So you can kind of tease apart the plants. You might seed a couple of seeds in each spot and then either thin them out. Do we have thinning here? No. So, let's say you overseed anything in a seed, even a kale plant, and you put 2 seeds in, then you want to make sure to thin it out. You want to make sure to pinch out one of the kale plants, even though it's kind of heartbreaking because they won't have enough space for each of them to grow. They need they need to have their own container or their own space to grow. For tomatoes, you can overseed them and then sort of tease them apart and put them in bigger containers. And that also allows you to choose the healthiest looking ones. And it's time to do that when the true leaves start to arrive. So the cotyledons are always sort of an oval shape, standard leaf, and then the true leaves are what are going to look more what like the leaves will look like when they grow up. Yeah, and so you just replant those into a larger container with more space. And then once you're almost ready to transplant, so you can see how big these seedlings get, and you can see that these look like peppers. So you can either put them in a smaller container and transplant them a little earlier, or by that I mean have them growing in the greenhouse less time. Or if you're going to let them get this big, like the picture on the right, you want to pot them up into a larger container. Those look like pint containers. So, just a frame of reference for these larger plants. And you can usually get a sense if you see the plant is getting too big for its container, then you can choose to move it up. And that's something you do in growing houseplants, right? Like if your houseplant gets too big, you need to put it in a bigger pot. It's just a bit more fast paced. So before you actually transplant your seedlings into the ground, you want to harden them off, which means getting them used to being outside in their containers for a week. And once again, this is for a spring, a cooler spring weather. But if they've been inside in this really controlled temperature, you want them to get used to the sort of harsher reality of outdoor nature. So you might start by just putting them outside during the day and taking them back in at night, and then gradually leaving them out at night, or covering them at night or something like that. And then you also want to protect them from direct sun at first by putting them in a slightly shady location because they can get sunburned at first. And then after about, 4 days to a week, they'll start to, be a bit more hardy and ready to be transplanted. So once the temperatures are right and after hardening off, you're going to transplant them. You want to make sure that you're spacing appropriately. That once again is usually on the seed packets, or if you look up information about certain varieties, it'll give you information like every pepper should be 8 inches apart or something like that. Just a reminder, it seems like they're really far apart, but like the plants are going to get way, way bigger. And then plant at the same depth as the top layer of the soil in the soil pod, except for tomatoes, which you can plant up their stem a bit and they'll grow roots out of their stem. Water and fertilizer is great in this moment. You sort of help with the transition. And some plants are more hardy than others with transplanting. So, just something to consider. And then, some plants don't benefit from transplanting, as I mentioned before, like carrots, or, any other typically root crops don't like to be transplanted. So those are plants you're going to direct seed in the ground. Beans, root crops, peas, you can transplant peas and beans, but they don't love it. And so, some plants can go both ways. Lettuce can be direct seeded, cucumbers can be direct seeded, but they often do better transplanted if you have the capacity. But if you only have limited ability to grow seeds indoors, they definitely can be direct seeded outside. Things like squash and cucumbers, sometimes critters eat the seeds. So that's another, or sunflowers for sure. That's a reason sometimes to transplant them. And in general, like if you have a good seed set up at home or you're getting seedlings, they're just going to do better because they had a easier start to life. And it saves time and space in your garden. If you're direct seeding, as we were seeding in the transplanting containers, seed a bit more than you need and then thin. Once again, there'll be instructions on a seed packet, or you can look it up online, and then make sure that you're watering consistently and protecting them when they're in their more baby stage. Usually use thin direct seeded crops when they have their true leaves. So let's say you do a row of radishes. Once they start to show their true leaves, it's probably a good time to thin them out. That's it. Happy to take any more questions that people have. Let me see what's in the. Thank you guys for your crowdsourced knowledge. I will send out the slides, and then Sarah, we can connect about, we'll send information about upcoming events. Protecting seedlings from animals. I mean, the reality, this is a big question in gardening in general, right? The reality is it's hard to protect from animal pests. You can create netting or fencing around your garden. It depends if you have a raised bed or in-ground gardening. It depends on the pest too. But for certain pests like squirrels or birds, creating netted environment around your plants using bird netting can work. Sometimes birds can get stuck in the netting, which is not great. So it's something, you can avoid. Some people start and they make hoops and then they cover it with rime, which is a gardening sort of fabric material that it's like light porous. So light can still get in, but then different pests can't get in. And that also creates a little bit more heat in the spring. So that's a nice way to start early in the spring, but eventually you do have to lift off the rime so that pollinators can get in. The radish seedlings show their true leaves before thinning. So that's the things like this picture with the tomato leaves here. You can see those leaves are the true leaves, and the radish will have the same sort of true leaves. Can you plant plants in egg cartons directly outside? Yeah, it's the same idea as like peat containers. The egg carton might the roots can't necessarily grow through the egg carton. It might not break down in time. So just make sure that you're sort of ripping the egg carton up before transplanting. Yeah, I will send out the slides. That's the only problem with egg cartons, but there's a couple problems with egg cartons. My main concern with egg cartons is I find that they're not deep enough. But they are okay for like cilantro or lettuce, something that has very little root growth until it gets transplanted. But I think on top of that, like they don't necessarily break down in time, but it's worth trying. They could break down in time. It might just be worth like kind of like breaking up the actual egg carton piece before you transplant it. All plants have true leaves. Or I mean, yeah, all annual crops should have true leaves. Feel free to challenge me on that. I'm not, but I mean, there aren't plants, you know, everything typically, let me think about this. Typically plants need to be thinned. I think if you're growing mixed green, like sort of cutting lettuce or arugula, sometimes it doesn't need to be thinned, but you just need to be mindful that you're not overseeding it. Like I've seeded the kind of seeds like mixed greens, which you might do in rows. Arugula, I've done like a bed of arugula direct seeded, and there's usually like information on the seed packet or in the catalog online about how many seeds per, you know, it might be say acre, but you know, you want to get like 100 square feet or something like that. And then, you know, maybe you're not growing a 10 by 10 foot bed, but you're growing a 3 by 3 foot bed of arugula, and you can kind of divide 100 square feet into, you know, I don't know what, 9. I'm just like trying to do math in my head right now, but you should have a sense of how many seeds that you're putting into a given space without overseeding it, so they don't get too crowded. Because I've had arugula just not do well because there's too many seeds in the area. So, and it probably would be a drag to thin out arugula if you've just sprinkled the seed everywhere. That's a reason why it is actually easier to do rows in general. And then usually seed packets will say like thin, sow 1 every 1/4 inch and then thin to 1 every inch. And thinning is, you know, a lot of work, but it will make your plants do better. Like especially for root crops, you know, if you have too many seeds, they're going to crowd each other out. If you're growing carrots and you have too many seeds, they're just not going to be big carrots. So if you want an actual sizable carrot, then, or a radish, for instance, if you just have tons of radish sprouts, you'll have good radish greens maybe, but you're not going to have like that nice radish. So, you know, with radishes, it's easy for me to think about thinning. You basically want there to be enough space for there to be radishes, you know, like for it to grow to a full radish and not crowd out the one next to it. And you can thin before they have their true leaves, or a little afterwards. You just don't want to do it that much longer afterwards, because then they'll start to crowd each other out. And if you do it too early, then the plants you want to keep in the soil might not be rooted enough to sort of be ready for you pulling out the plants next to them. In general, thinning when they're really small, you don't necessarily need to uproot the whole little sprout. You can just like pinch the top off so it's not going to grow anymore. Using toilet paper rolls to start seeds. I think it's fine. I just like sometimes I'm skeptical, like you're putting like bleached toilet paper in the soil, feels a little like not amazing, but I think it's fundamentally fine. I feel like toilet paper would break down well enough. You're saying you start it in sort of a row, like wet toilet paper that you fold over, and then you put the whole thing in the ground. What might be a few fruits or veggies or herbs you should suggest for beginners? That's a good question. So it depends if you're direct seeding or growing indoors. I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting indoors unless you like have the proper setup and equipment. That might be a little bit more of an intermediate gardening practice. In terms of direct seeding, I do think radishes are a great thing to start with. I think if you really never grown anything before, I would start with transplants. I would start by getting seedlings at a seedling sale. You could do a mix of seedling sale and then direct seeding your root crop. So I would get tomato and eggplant seedlings, and then I would seed beans, radishes. Beans are pretty straightforward. You could do bush beans or pole beans and then make a trellis. And then just making sure with radishes that you're thinning them enough. But they're pretty hardy crops and they are pretty fast to grow, which is really nice. In general, like grow what you love though, and you'll probably learn the best by having the incentive of wanting to eat it. The same instructions apply to flower seeds. Yeah, so even like days to maturity would be, instead of like a tomato that you're gonna pick, it's gonna be a bloom that's for cutting or for enjoying. So they typically follow the same, they run the same way. Yeah. I still don't know. Oh, I guess I can look up botanical interest. I still don't know. Yeah, they're okay. Yeah, I remember these now. They aren't the best. They have really beautiful packets though. They're often seeds you get at a hardware store, or they're fine. I feel like Ace Hardware typically has botanical interests. I don't think they're like the best, but they're fine. They're not going to be bad. I think I would recommend, if you're going to like a Home Depot type of hardware store, trying to Seeds of Change is a better one than some of the like Burpee or whatever, or just like very hybrid, very like overly bred crops that you maybe want to avoid. And like ordering online from seed catalogs is really fun, and especially if there's a company that you have like aligned mission with or something. Botanical interests are fine though. Like I'll like pre-order my seeds and then hit up Ace and get some of these packets if I'm in a pinch. And if you're only getting a couple packets, I would understand why getting them at the hardware store makes sense. Often like grocery stores can have them too. Yeah. Does pinching off literally mean to pinch off? You could cut them. I feel like getting in there with the scissors might be more trouble than it's worth. Like usually I don't have any nails, but if you have like your finger and your pointer finger and your thumbnail, you can just like snip it with those nails. I mean, I can usually just do it with my fingers if I don't have nails. The packages are really beautiful. Book or other resources and how to grow from seeds. It's a good question. I'd have to think about that. I can see if we have a manual. We have a sort of manual for different things that we could send out. I do think Johnny's, I'm just gonna open the Johnny's website. I do think that's like the best resource I would recommend. Okay. So let's see. This is tools. I'm trying to think of. Okay, let me try a different way. How did we get there? Growers Library. Okay, if you go to Growers Library, there's a bunch of resources here. You can figure out what your hardiness zone is. There's some instructional videos. There's planning tools and calculators. It looks like there's a library. I wonder what that means. Oh, it just like has information on all these different varieties. I just think they have a lot of really great information. And I use this. So seed quantity calculator to figure out how much space you're growing in. It is a little bit more suited to farming scale, but it can really be used. If you're starting your own seeds, I feel like you're kind of like a tiny farmer. And so here's what I mentioned. So you can put in your spring frost last spring frost. So I'll say, let's say, I don't remember exactly what date we're at in Boston, but let's say it's March 15th. And if you're in California, you can just say, I don't know, do you even have a frost? When, you can just say now. And then pumpkins, so it'll say 3 to 4 weeks. I would definitely veer on 3. And so that it'll tell you what week to seed it and then when to put it outside. So that's a really great, so yeah, so there's a bunch of other information here. So if you go to Johnny's Seeds and then you go to Growers Library. Okay. Any last questions? Well, this was great. I will send out the recording with the slides and upcoming events, and I'll link the Johnny's website. And oh, I see one more question. Back to the beginner question. Let's say we've done well with herbs and tomatoes from seed outside. Would those be best to try from seeds indoors? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that being said, if you have success direct seeding it, you just want it to be more reliable, I guess. You could probably try plants that you're not direct seeding outside, like peppers or eggplant or something like that. Yeah, and you'll have my email so you can ask any follow-up questions. All right. Have a great rest of your night, everyone. I'm going to end the recording.